Well, it's the last day of COP, so people are basically realizing that what's happening inside of COP is a bunch of BS, and it's not solving any problems, much less the most dire problem that we have, which is exponential planetary overheating. And so what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is right here, places like this, where real people are having actual conversations about actual solutions and organizing to get all people on Earth to come together to form a planetary collective intelligence so that we can solve our most daunting problems. These are wicked problems, problems which defy solution, right? Well, we actually have some wonderful solutions. For example, marine cloud brightening, which is one solution within a broader class of solutions called solar radiation management, or SRM. And marine cloud brightening was invented by a Scotsman in Edinburgh, at the University of Edinburgh, Professor Stephen Salter, and it is the best solution we know of for cooling our planet in time to save life on Earth. So we're here to promote these specific solutions: marine cloud brightening, collective intelligence, going plant-based, feeding everyone plant-based foods as a basic human right.
Yep.
These are some of the most important solutions that we urgently need to implement in order to save, heal, and transform life on Earth.
Yes.
So I arrived here on the morning of the 1st.
From where? Where did
I live on an island off the west coast of the United States, off the coast of Washington, right near Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it an area that's been affected by the forest fires? Have you had
Well,
your island?
The island itself is being surrounded by water. It's relatively protected. It's the big open areas that are the most vulnerable. But we've definitely felt the heat. We got the heat bomb this last summer, and also all the smoke from the forest fires has been devastating. So, but yeah, everyone's affected. And what we've seen thus far, we ain't seen nothing yet compared to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, okay, so it's very depressing what's been happening inside the conference, right? Do you feel any optimism? Do you feel that there's any momentum for change as a result of this?
Yeah, I do have reason for optimism, and the optimism stems from the fact that it is now obvious that what's happening inside of COP is an absolute farce. It is corrupt. It is corrupt because it is highly politicized, and it is highly monetized.
Yes.
And those are the two essential ingredients to a toxic cocktail called corruption, institutional corruption. Add to that the fact that garbage in, garbage out, they're being fed garbage by the IPCC, right, which is also highly politicized, very watered down. They're addressing none of the 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops driving exponential planetary overheating.
Yes.
Absolutely none. And so we're getting a very watered down view. They predicted a gradual decrease in the Arctic ice. We've lost 80% of our Arctic ice. It's fallen off a cliff.
Yes.
And so the real story is not being told either by the IPCC or inside of COP, right? We're being a watered down story that if we reduce emissions, that will cool the planet. Nothing could be further from the truth, because it's actually the dirtiest emissions that are, however unintentionally, keeping us alive right now, because those dirtiest emissions emit aerosols, which are the aerosol masking effect, also known as the global dimming. Thank you. So, and thank you for being so aware of all this, because this is essential for then saying, okay, well then, if not decarbonization, then what? The one remaining solution is solar radiation management, reflecting a small but significant percentage of sunlight back into space, thus reversing the heat imbalance of the planet. That's the only card left in our hand that we have to play at this moment to avert the worst effects of climate change, which are yet to come.
Yes.
Especially as we lose the last of our Arctic ice. According to the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, okay, one of the most highly renowned oceanographic institutions in the world, we could be facing an ice-free Arctic this coming summer.
Exactly.
Summer of 2022.
Yeah.
According to Professor James Anderson at Harvard, at the latest summer of 2023, we will have an ice-free Arctic, okay? If we do not take radical action along the lines of solar radiation management, forcibly cooling the planet, right?
Yeah.
Just like a fire department forcibly cools a burning house by spraying water on it.
Yes. But in a debate or a narrative that is dominated by the promotion of market solutions, right?
Yeah.
How can we even start to make headway with promoting these sorts of?
Well, I mean, if we want, we could frame solar radiation management in the framing of a market solution.
Yeah.
In the following way, we could say, okay, and this is actually under discussion right now.
Okay.
That we secure private funding on the order of $10 billion, which is a drop in the bucket. With $10 billion, we can actually cool the planet with marine cloud brightening. And in addition to the primary objective of cooling the entire planet, there are smaller local objectives of ameliorating the devastating weather patterns which have caused drought in Australia, flooding in East Africa. Those are both caused by an imbalance in the Indian dipole. We can bring that back into balance with local application of marine cloud brightening. So, in terms of how do we have a market solution, very simple. We essentially become the planetary fire department, whoever organizes the marine cloud brightening, whether it's our group or another group or a coalition of groups, which is the most likely. We basically say, look, okay, United States, Eastern Seaboard, do you want more hurricanes? We can prevent them, just pay us.
Yeah.
You want a market solution? Pay us and we will take away the hurricanes. Pay us and we will take away the droughts. Pay us and we will prevent the last of the Arctic ice from melting, destroying all the crops in the northern hemisphere from excess planetary overheating. So that's one market solution. I mean, it doesn't have to be a market solution, but if somebody is attached to it being a market solution, we can come up with market solutions for that.
You sense you've got a science background. Am I right in thinking that? Who are you and what do you do?
Right, I'm Jamen Shively, at your service. And I do have a science background. I studied civil and environmental engineering at UC Berkeley and MIT. Between undergraduate and grad school. And I've been, even though I then went off into a career in tech, I was corporate strategy manager at Microsoft, where I really developed my marketing side, which is expressed now in how I'm doing all of this. But I've always kept abreast of what's going on with the climate, and back in the 80s and 90s, the doomsday scenarios were many decades away in the future, and we could kind of kick the can down the road and be very theoretical about the whole thing. Right now, it's right here in our face. We're losing species at hundreds per day, devastating ecosystems. The fabric of life is being ripped apart right in front of us. And we're talking market solutions for decarbonization, which will have essentially no effect or the reverse effect that we want.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's time for actual conversations with actual people like yourself and myself and your audience and all of us. Let us come together and have these urgent conversations. And in the process, let us form a planetary collective intelligence, because what's really needed here is for humanity to have a massive upgrade in our intelligence, our ability to make sense of what's happening, our ability to filter through the truth and filter out the lies. And that's on the side of diagnosis. On the side of the cure, we need to talk about actual solutions like marine cloud brightening. However unpopular among myriad groups, that's totally irrelevant. The bottom line is, will it work? And does it have any negative effects? Please.
Hi, my name is Maya, and yesterday I actually attended an event that kind of spoke about these kinds of technologies, and I've just been kind of listening to what you've been saying. And I have a few concerns about these technologies because basically my concerns are twofold. So first of all, with the science and technologies, when you put sulfites right into the air.
No, not at all. Marine cloud brightening consists of nothing, and this is part of the issue, is that there's a lot of obfuscation, and there's a major baby in the bathwater effect here. Because the reality is that some geoengineering solutions are absolutely stupid, destructive, and toxic, right? Like what you mentioned. What we're talking about here, marine cloud brightening, developed right here in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh, is a technique of spraying pure ocean water, no chemicals added whatsoever, pure ocean water into the air to form bright white clouds that will reflect sunlight back into space, thus reversing the heat imbalance of the planet, which is currently killing us. Back to you, Maya.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, I guess I haven't actually learned about this technology, so I can't speak specifically to this, but I do know that in general, using these technological developments as a way to go forward, like to combat the climate crisis, it sort of creates this idea that we have an alternative, a plan B, as opposed to cutting out fossil fuels. And where we're at right now, we cannot afford to be like, oh, we can just reduce fossil fuel emissions, and then eventually, if it doesn't work out, we have this plan B. And so even just having these conversations about these technologies that we don't even know what their true effects might be on a global scale. Like, we can make tests about this, but ultimately nature is, organic and unpredictable, and we can't rely on these technologies that we are like not 100% sure will work on a global scale to address the impacts of climate change that are being felt today. We can't just rely on these and as a plan B to cutting out fossil fuels entirely right now.
Yeah. So first, great points, Maya. And first of all, it's not an either or, right? Either we reduce fossil fuel emissions or we go for some techno fix. Let's go back to the plan A of reducing fossil fuel emissions, which I fully support, by the way. That alone is no plan at all. Because, for example, let's say that overnight tonight, we eliminate all of the dirtiest emissions, just for starters, right? All the coal-burning power plants and diesel trucks and things like that. What would the effect be? In the very short term, the effect would actually be a substantial increase in temperature because we would lose the aerosol masking effect, also known as global dimming, caused by all the particulates that are emitted by these dirtiest emissions. That's what makes them dirty, right? Non-dirty emissions without particulates, just emit CO2 and methane. But the dirtiest emissions emit particulates, which actually reflect sunlight back into space. They're a form of inadvertent, however effective, solar radiation management. So pure decarbonization alone simply won't get us there. We need stronger medicine. And in terms of those who are opposed to any technological interventions at all, we first have to take a step back and recognize that we are right at the middle, or perhaps at the end, of a massive planetary experiment in geoengineering, which let's take all the fossil fuel reserves of the planet and burn them up in a matter of decades. We're in the middle of an experiment right now that's run out of control, and like an experiment that sets a building on fire, right? You can't put out the fire by stopping the experiment. You actually need to bring in something external. In that case, of the fire department, to spray water on the burning building, right? Which also has unknown and unknowable consequences, but we do it anyway because the main consequence is to put out the fires. The planet is burning, you know this. Forest fires, wildfires from Australia to the western United States, Canada, etc., Brazil, it's out of control. The main driver of all of this is exponential planetary overheating. It's going like this, the rate of accumulation of heat of the planet. We need to first stop that and then reverse it. There's only one way to do that in time, and that's solar radiation management. Decarbonization alone not only would not achieve it, it would actually be counterproductive in the short term. And no, I'm not paid by the oil and gas industry. I'm just a private individual, scientist, engineer, who cares and is actively engaged. Yes, Mike?
Just on the what you were saying about the decarbonization causing a big spike, I think that it would cause a spike because of what you were saying with the particulates at first, but the fact is that, like, with the science that has been the graphs, the projections coming from the scientists in the IPCC report and everything, they show that though there might be this spike, ultimately we have the power to reduce our trajectory by cutting out fossil fuels. So whether we go forward full force with fossil fuels or whether we cut them out, we're going to see this increase, and we cannot afford to continue the fossil fuel extraction. And I know that's not what you're saying. I just think that it needs to be our 100% top priority to cut out these fossil fuels and cut out greenhouse gas emissions. And my worry is that when we have these technologies, they really do distract the narrative. They're like, we have this plan up our sleeve. We don't worry, like, even if we can't manage to transition away from fossil fuels, we have this plan. And this, like you were saying, decarbonization might not work alone. This will definitely not work alone. And ultimately, you need to address the issue of climate change at its root. And we know that global warming is caused by the emissions of fossil fuels being burnt.
Yeah.
And so we need to stop that first, deal with that spike. Yes, we're going to have that spike, but we're going to have that spike even if we continue our fossil fuel emissions instead of focusing 100% of our energy on stopping fossil fuel extraction. So we need to focus our energy on that and then deal with that spike, and then I think the Earth can take care of itself as well once we kind of like take a step back. Yeah, my other part of my concern was just that when we like put our lives and the future of our Earth in the hands of markets, that's really concerning to me, because ultimately they're looking for money.
Yeah. Right?
Like, they're profit based, and so if we're putting our futures in the hands of people who are just looking for money exploits, and we've seen that time and time again, and I'm just concerned that this is just another opportunity for that to kind of take control.
Wow, very good points, Maya. Thank you so much, and thank you for being in the conversation, because this is how we do collective sense making. Now, let me first address what you mentioned about IPCC, and then I'll talk about the market side. Careful there, James, behind you, and there's a pedestrian behind. The IPCC is highly politicized, and their reports, their analysis filters out the 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops driving exponential planetary overheating, cataloged by Professor Guy McPherson. Why is the IPCC so politicized? It's controlled by the most powerful governments in the world who have massive vested interests in fossil fuels, in growth, economic growth, the banking sectors, etc. So the IPCC is doing humanity a tremendous disservice by putting forward projections which are absolutely false. They projected a gradual decline in the Arctic ice. It's fallen off a cliff. We've lost 80% of our Arctic ice thus far. The IPCC predicted something completely different from that. So they're absolutely wrong. They have bad data. Those are bad projections that lead to an erroneous conclusion that we can actually solve this with decarbonization. We can't. I'm all in favor of decarbonization, but we must put out the fire. We must stop the exponential planetary overheating so that we can then afford to lose the global dimming effect caused by the dirtiest emissions, right? So that's the most sensible plan overall. And I do understand the logic. There is certain logic that says, hey, here's a narrative. If we cool the planet using solar radiation management, that's going to take the pressure off of decarbonization, right? All of this is based on the assumption of a continuation of the collective stupidity of our current system, our current market-based system, the current system of global capitalism, neoliberalism, call it by whatever labels you will. That is the root cause of our problems, because it's basically causing us to take anything that can be monetized in the very short term, dig it up, set it on fire, kill it, eat it, et cetera, et cetera. And so we must get to the roots of our problems. if we're going to solve our problems, we must presuppose some form of intelligence above the collective stupidity that we're suffering from right now. Hence, collective intelligence. This is my main focus because that's what brings us together into these conversations, which enables us to make sense of the problems and the potential solutions. So the big solution is for us to continue this conversation and for all of you to join the conversation. I mean, that's why we're here, right? So that we can save, heal, and transform life on Earth. If all of us get into conversation, not just one conversation, but a network of conversations, where, for example, over in this conversation right here, it's scientists analyzing the data and getting to the truth, right? How bad is current exponential planetary overheating? What's it projected to continue at? And what can possibly solve it? Meanwhile, over here, we might have conversations about the ethics of geoengineering as a whole. So we need to engage into a network of conversations to do collective sense making beyond what any one of us can do on our own. Back to you, Maya. Thank you.
So just on what you were saying about collective stupidity, I think that's an interesting point because if we look back at our history, this collective stupidity has only really started taking control of our ecosystem and really feeding into climate change with the Industrial Revolution, the development of all these new technologies. Before that, we had many sustainable lifestyles, like indigenous lifestyles. I've learned a lot about this during this conference. And honestly, my main takeaways from this conference is that the solutions are already here with nature. And we can't play the role of the ultimate manipulator of the entire Earth because the Earth does not belong to humans. And I think that's something we really need to take into mind. We need to return to nature-based solutions, and that means first of all stopping fossil fuel extraction. And then in terms of the collective conversations that you're talking about, well, actually, before I get into that, one more point about the acting as the hand that kind of controls the ecosystem. I feel like this technologies, geoengineering in general, they kind of just encourage that idea that humans have the power to manipulate the entire ecosystem. And what you were saying about the reports, the IPCC reports, being way off, that's because it's impossible to make a representative projection of what our impact is on Earth, right? You can't have a perfect projection of what the future is. We can't read the future. And same thing goes for this technology. We don't know ultimately the impacts that this technology might have on the greater ecosystem. Even if it takes down that global temperature on average, we don't know what it's going to do on the local level to the communities that are already struggling, with droughts, with major hurricanes, with natural disasters that are already hard hit. And we don't know what this kind of technology is going to have, what kind of impact it's going to have on the local level. Now, to your point about the global conversation, I think that's absolutely necessary and something that we've really seen lacking in the COP within the Blue Zone is a lack of willingness to listen, to stop trying to go full force ahead in new technologies or, market-based solutions and just listen, open our hearts and listen to the people who are hurting right now, who are on those front lines, who are, just trying to get water every day in their lives. I think we need to listen to them and listen to our history as well and look back and recognize that this ecosystem degradation only really started with the development of new technologies. So we need to return to a nature-based system, I think, is my main takeaway, and that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about geoengineering.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, you brought up a number of really good points, and one of those is our ability to predict, our ability to model. I actually come from a computer modeling background, and one piece of wisdom is that models are useless, but modeling is essential, right? Because in the process of modeling and comparing actual data with predictions, we can say, well, what about our modeling was right and what about it was wrong, so that we can improve it for the next go around. We actually have so much more data now than we've ever had before. There are so many sensors and ongoing experiments measuring greenhouse gas concentrations, particulate concentrations, etc. And so just because our modeling is not perfect, right, is no excuse for excluding from the modeling known vicious cycles that are driving exponential planetary overheating, and the IPCC is knowingly excluding those phenomena from its modeling. So it is, what's coming out of the IPCC has proven to be over time and continues to be absolute garbage, worthless information, because it's basically lies and manipulation, right? In support of a certain narrative that market-based solutions can get us out of here, right? Solar, companies that make solar panels that are quite profitable, etc. They're the ones who bought off Al Gore. He used to be deep into this conversation, but he got bought off. And so we must pay attention to the science that we have available to us, and that science is pointing unequivocally to the conclusion that we are exponentially overheating, and we have to stop it. I mean, it's a really fierce exponential, and we need a really serious heavy-duty forcing to stop it. SRM is the only one that I can see. I've been on this since I've been studying civil and environmental engineering at UC Berkeley and MIT, going back to the 80s and 90s when I was an undergraduate and grad student. That's not to say that I know everything, but I've been on this, and that is part of the reason why we need a whole network of conversations, because with 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops, we need basically a conversation for each, and a synthesis and a summary of each. We need to be responsible for what we know. What I know is that decarbonization cannot stop the exponential. We're on track to becoming a hot rock like Mars or Venus, and humanity is on track to going extinct within the next 10 years if we don't cool the planet and save the biosphere. The two biggest levers we can throw in that direction are cooling the planet forcibly with SRM, and yes, I understand the concerns about that. I have those concerns too, right? But we're at such an extreme moment that either we spray water on the burning house, or it's going to continue to burn down. Removing the matches is not enough to put out the fire in the burning house. That's my analogy for decarbonization. Yes, the matches were the cause, and so sure, the first thought is, well, remove the matches. Okay, we did. Is that enough? No. Can it be enough? No. It's excuse me, it's building under its own steam. The other major solution is going plant-based. Stopping animal agriculture, which is the leading cause of climate change. Far more than fossil fuel burning is animal agriculture. 87%, according to Dr. Silas Rao, who will be here later today. He can give you the summary himself. But in addition to driving global warming, it's also the major driver of the destruction of the biosphere, slashing and burning the Amazon to make way for cattle grazing, for example. So, bottom line, we need to be responsible for what we know, and we need to be very thoughtful and proactive on a variety of fronts. It's not just as simple as, well, stop carbon. Well, how are we going to get the global economy to stop, the fossil fuel emissions? But more importantly, it's simply not enough. And so we need to look at the facts. We need to make this a fact-based conversation. Back to you, Maya.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd be interested in hearing what what the scientist who said that animal agriculture is the leading cause over fossil fuels, because I've never heard that. I've heard that fossil fuels are really the leading cause for climate change. The emissions we're putting directly out into the atmosphere. It's not to say that animal agriculture is not a huge portion. It is, but ultimately, I think that fossil fuels are the number one factor, and so yeah, I would just like to fact check that. Yes, what you were saying about the fire analogy, I think, is really relevant. ultimately, right now, we do have a world on fire, and if you have a fire, right, you have like fuel for that fire, those twigs, those matches, and you were saying that removing the matches is not going to help. Potentially, if you, like, right now, we're obviously, like, even if we stop decarbonization 100%, I mean, sorry, not that, even if we stop fossil fuels 100%, that's, like, basically stopping adding those twigs to the fire, right?
Right.
But ultimately, once you stop adding those twigs to the fire is going to keep going, right, until everything in that fire is burnt. That's basically to say, like, on the trajectory we're on right now, we're going to need to stop, like, decarbonize absolutely 100%. And then, yes, there's going to be that spike as the rest of those twigs continue burning as we basically transition out of fossil fuels. And yes, those particulates are going to cause, well, the lack of particulates is going to cause, you know, an extra little spike.
Yeah.
Maybe not so little. I haven't looked at those models, but we cannot continue adding twigs to the fire while trying to also, like, cover it with a, like, with this extra technology. I mean, I'm just gonna go back to the root of what we're talking here.
Yeah.
We can't just try to address the climate change from these outside technologies without addressing it at the root cause of continuing to burn fossil fuels. And like I said before, I'm just afraid that having this narrative of these solutions, these technological solutions, is going to really detract from the conversation of needing to stop fossil fuels 100% immediately. About the solar panels and the market-based solutions that you were talking about, the transition to renewables and everything, I think that my question for you, I guess, is how are these technologies any different? They're also market-based solutions. They're technologies that ultimately are going to be run by for-profit companies. And I think that putting the future of our planet in the hands of for-profits, like market-based solutions, is just, like I said earlier, just going to continue this toxic cycle of not addressing the problem at the root.
Yeah. No, good point. So I'll talk about the detracting from the conversation of reducing or eliminating fossil fuels in a moment. But first, let's talk about a market-based solution. So does marine cloud brightening have to be done as a market-based solution? No. The ideal would be that the governments of the world get together, ante up, and we do this as a government program or a nonprofit program. I am very anti-market. Anything that's driven by somebody making money is almost inevitably going to steer it off course, right? I happen to believe that money is a poison, and that unbridled accumulation of money as the mode of production that we're living in right now is one of the absolute root causes of our problems. So I'm not in favor of a market-based solution for this. However, given that we have on the order of months to get it done, I am exploring possibilities to do it as a market-based solution where we implement it and then go and collect money from the beneficiaries of the cooling of the planet as just one model. I mean, we've got to get it done, right? So I have a cousin who's a successful venture capitalist. I'm going to meet with him and other venture capitalists and say, okay, you know, if we had to do this as a market-based solution, how would we do it, right? Because we need to keep all options open at this point. And this then gets back to your earlier point, which I want to address, that talking about this actually detracts from the conversation of fossil fuel reduction. And in a scarcity model, that there's only so much bandwidth from the media, from the activists, et cetera, and we need to stay focused, and we shouldn't detract ourselves. That comes from a presumption of scarcity, that there's only so much time and only so much attention that only so many people have. I'm starting from a different model, which says that planetary collective intelligence is about to take off exponentially, where we will have many millions of participants in these conversations. Here's the interesting thing. We already have millions of participants in, hundreds of thousands of conversations about all these different things, but these conversations and the participants, we are all separate from each other. We're fragmented. This conversation's happening here, but we're completely disconnected from conversations that are happening even a block away, right? Let alone, thousands of miles away. What our biggest opportunity right now is to put together a network of conversations that is hyper connected to each other, right? And I'd love to have a conversation with you about that, which is
someone who loves to hear their own voice and talks about conversation.
Yeah, and love to hear your voice as well. Heckler's welcome. But more importantly, back to the point, we are on the cusp of a planetary collective intelligence based on a network of conversations that is hyper-connected. And I believe that just as you and I find meaning in getting together and having a conversation, even if we don't agree, through conversation, we will discover things that we didn't know before, and we will be able to share things with others that we didn't know before. And that will increase our overall collective intelligence. I believe this is about to take off exponentially, and there will be no scarcity. And I believe of intellect. I mean, one of the advantages of having 8 billion people in the world is you have 8 billion minds who could be working on this problem together. That's a huge engine of intellectual possibility. And so my belief is, and I'd love to talk with you, have a more detailed conversation about collective intelligence and an evolutionary trajectory towards collective superintelligence, which is something which has been hypothesized, written about, dreamed about by philosophers, engineers, science fiction writers for decades. We're right on the cusp of it now, precisely because of technology. And one of the principles of it is that anyone is welcome to have any conversation that they want to have, of whatever nature, right, as long as they're not hurting someone in the process. And there is no shutting down of conversations and saying, hey, that conversation is detracting from this one over here. No, if you want to have that conversation over here, have it. And if other people want to have a very different conversation over here, let them. Right, because I believe freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of conversation, freedom of association, these are all essential for us to get to a point of collective superintelligence. Back to you, Maya.
So on the point of collective superintelligence, I think that, okay, wait, first of all, like on this point of like taking off into this atmosphere of global conversation, yeah. I think that that's one of the real benefits of what's been happening outside of the blue zone at COP over these past few weeks. Is just that it has brought together so many people from different backgrounds, so many indigenous people, so many people on the front lines, with ordinary people, with scientists, with policymakers, but unfortunately not the ones who are making the decisions on the large scale. Yeah. About all the conversations, I absolutely agree that that's how creativity is sparked. That's how good ideas come about. That's how we build off of each other and come to, like a place where 8 billion people can work collectively to solve this issue. The thing is that we need to, focus on the facts, as you were saying earlier. We know that decarbonization, stopping fossil fuels 100% is absolutely critical. Even if we are to ultimately, try to use other technologies as well, we need to first of all recognize and agree that fossil fuels are contributing enormously to this problem, and we cannot stop climate change without stopping fossil fuels immediately. And though I'm not for shutting down other conversations, I think that first and foremost, that needs to be an undeniable truth. And a lot of what I'm frustrated from, like, what's happening inside of COP is that we know the solutions. We know that we need to stop going forward in this, like, growth-based economy that just exploits our nature. We know that that's the solution, right? And yet, they're still trying to delay. They're trying to delay doing that. And why are they trying to delay? It's because in part they're trying to use excuses as, like, we can use these technologies that are existing. They're ultimately just trying to make more money. And what you were saying about the market-based economies, like having to potentially be open to having for-profit companies be in charge of technologies like this, I think that's very dangerous, because although yes, we feel under pressure, we feel like we need to do this in a matter of months and a matter of years, and yes, we do. First and foremost, we need to stop fossil fuels. We need to take a breath. We need to take a breath like we did during COVID, which made us all pause and reflect a little bit, and listen. Listen to the fact that we need to stop going forward full force in trying to develop new technologies which have led us to this point. Take a breath and return to, nature-based solutions, decarbonization, and protecting the environment that does exist right now, that these systems that do take care of themselves. Even during COVID, we saw that, like, some of these toxic cycles of, like, pollution and everything, we saw that when we took a pause as a collective humanity, we saw some things starting to come back,
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we take that as an important lesson from the pandemic and recognize that our solution, the number one solution, is not to add these technologies that may or may not work, but to return to just, like, first of all, preserving nature, stopping fossil fuels, and opening our hearts to those who are most affected, opening our hearts to the animals, the other forms of life on this earth, and recognizing that we cannot just do this for humanity.